All right.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name's Alex Tam. I'm going to be your facilitator for today's teaching. It is on International Workers' Day and labor organizing, specifically militant labor organizing. So, first, let me introduce myself and our panelists. My name is Alex. I am a member of the Democratic Socialists of Oahu, or DSO, and I'm also a teacher as my day job and an organizer in the HSTA, the Hawaii State Teachers Association. To my left is Dr. Ellen Ray Cachola, who
Oh,
she brings over 10 years in archival research and practice, holding a PhD from UCLA's Information Studies Department and an MLISC from UH Manoa, and previous degrees in cultural anthropology and political science. She has applied her archival skills at the William S. Richardson School of Law Library, preserving and making accessible legal histories of Hawaii and the Oceanic region, and has published and taught on labor history in Hawaii as an instructor for the Department of Ethnic Studies. Let's give her a warm round of applause. To my right is Louis Bernardo, who has worked at Halenani Rehab and Nursing Center since 2001 as a restorative nurse aide, or RNA. Over the years, he has emerged as a respected leader among his coworkers, helping organize rallies, petitions, and strikes that have earned Halenani workers a reputation as one of the most militant and unified divisions within Local 5. After being targeted and fired by management, Louis returned the very next day as a Local 5 organizer. He helped organize over 200 of his coworkers through contract negotiations, ultimately winning reinstatement not only for himself, but for another terminated worker as well. As frontline healthcare workers, Louis and his coworkers provide hands on, direct care for approximately 280 patients every day. Their work includes cleaning, bathing, feeding, assisting with mobility and restroom use, monitoring vital signs, and supporting patients through recovery and rehabilitation. When management cuts hours, such as reducing shifts from 8 to 6 hours, and chronically understaffs the facility, workers are forced to do more in less time, putting both themselves and vulnerable patients at risk. Louis played a key role in helping Halenani workers ratify their contract with an 100% yes vote. By standing united and maintaining pressure on management, they won back lost hours in staffing, secured significant wage increases, guaranteed 40 hours for full time workers, and protected family health care benefits. Let's give it up for Louis. Next, we have Nelson Salvador, the current director of organizing for the Hawaii Worker Center, who's been in his role with the Hawaii Worker Center since 2023. Previously, he holds experience organizing in the Philippines, multi sectoral organizing for workers, farmers, and indigenous people. So let's give a warm round of applause for Nelson. Last but not least, we have Yoko Liriano, a Japanese and Dominican queer woman of color and proud anti imperialist. Yoko was raised in Kapolei and has dedicated her career to systemic change and worker empowerment. Her journey to advocacy began in 2009 with anti gentrification campaigns in New York City, which served as her gateway into deep solidarity work with Palestinian and Filipino communities. Through her integration into these communities, she witnessed the rampant labor rights abuses facing migrant and undocumented workers, particularly Filipinos and Mexicans. Having worked on countless campaigns, she saw a recurring pattern of exploitation by abusive employers, ranging from exorbitant recruitment fees and the withholding of passports to wage theft and forced undocumented status. These experiences taught her that labor exploitation can happen to anyone. and from domestic caregivers and nurses to engineers and teachers. Above all, her work solidified her belief that collective worker action is the most effective force for reclaiming lost wages, dignity, and securing T visas for survivors of trafficking. Currently, she serves as labor relations specialist for the Hawaii Nurses Association and a board member of the Hawaii Worker Center. She approaches this role by drawing on her diverse history as a human rights and labor activist. Most notably, she was part of the CAP 10, the 10 community members who conducted a civil disobedience during the nurse lockout of Kapiolani Medical Center. These days, her time is mostly spent trying to herd the 2,400 plus nurses across Queens, Manamana, West, Wahiwa, and Kahimohala to collectively fight for safe staffing and better working conditions. Let's give her a warm round of applause, please. To set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today, we'll get a brief history of International Workers' Day, how it came to be, as well as talking about labor organizing and specifically militant or radical labor organizing. Quick disclaimer that I'm literally surrounded by experts, so if they say something different than what I say, you should probably listen to them. But to me, the simplest way that I can describe organizing is building people power. And for labor organizing is building worker power. That means building connectivity despite all of our differences, our different perspectives and backgrounds. And it involves every worker critically thinking, educating themselves and each other on the causes of their troubles and their collective solutions. Militant or radical labor organizing takes this a step further, ensuring that workers are fighting and demanding rather than simply asking and hoping. The greatest source of worker power is the strike, the ability to withhold labor and shut down profit making and put public pressure on the employer. So with that, I would like to ask our first question. Dr. Cachola, could you please explain the history of the Haymarket Massacre and how International Workers' Day came into being?
Okay. Thank you so much, Alex, for that introduction. I'm the librarian, so I kind of want to share just some pictures, but just to quickly share, because I know we're going to all discuss this history from our different perspectives. And the Haymarket Affair, we have come from CLEAR, the Center for Labor Education and Research, and we have material on U.S. labor history and Hawaii labor history, different historical multimedia resources. And so from my work in the library, I was able to find articles about the Haymarket Affair that was written by Dr. William Puett, who's the former director of CLEAR. And so from his writings, he talks about the Haymarket Affair as an event that was sparked by labor surplus driven by child labor and a flood of immigrant workers to Chicago in the late 1880s. And the Knights of Labor, which was a big union at the time, expanded to 700,000 members. And it spearheaded the movement for the 8-hour workday. On May 3rd, 1886, police killed 4 strikers at Chicago's McCormick Reaper Works, leading to a protest at Haymarket Square on May 4th. And during that rally, an unidentified person threw a bomb that killed 7 policemen. In the aftermath, 8 labor leaders were arrested, 4 were eventually hanged, and 1 committed suicide. This tragedy crushed the 8-hour movement and signaled the decline of the Knights of Labor. There were other worker organizations around at this time, one of which was the American Federation of Labor, or AFL. And the AFL differed from the Knights of Labor. The AFL focused on business unionism, seeking immediate wage gains and job-related improvements for skilled workers within the existing capitalist system. The Knights of Labor sought to replace the capitalist system with worker and producer cooperatives. So it was not easy to build fast unity among different sectors of exploited workers. Corporate elite responds to worker advancements by sabotaging and undercutting their gains. For example, manufacturers and employers use lockouts, armed guards, strike breakers, and company spies to dismantle the labor movements. And then companies establish welfare capitalism or management controlled benefits to prevent workers from forming independent unions. And the government practiced state repression like raids and legal prosecutions, particularly during the Red Scare, to harass and shut down union operations. In addition, there were class, race, and gender prejudices among workers at this time, which made it also hard to unify. The labor movement was fractured by worker orgs that had racist policies and practices. Skilled craft workers refused to organize unskilled and professional workers. So-called unskilled workers were often women and people of color. Professional workers were seen as part of the managerial class. And so the fight for the 8-hour movement moved slowly and unevenly across the US and world. It wasn't until unemployment during the Great Depression of the 1930s that the labor movement pushed for the Fair Labor Standards Act, which established an 8-hour workday and 40-hour week.
Awesome. Thank you. My next question is to our other panelists. So we'll start with Yoko. You want to go last? Uh, if you could just please introduce yourself and your work.
Hi, I'm Yoko. I currently work for the Hawaii Nurses Association. I currently am herding the thousands of nurses across the different Queens campuses. The my work on a day-to-day now is kind of boring. It's, grievance writing and, enforcing contract, but I guess the organizing aspect of that is that no matter how many grievances or even ULPs that you file against your employer, what really makes a change in the workplace is collective action, is bringing workers to think about how their own issue is not siloed with just themselves, but with their colleagues. And hopefully one day we'll learn that it's across the working class. But yeah, so that's my work, building communication and trying to raise some um a little bit of political analysis as well one day through that work and fighting against the biggest private employer in Hawaii.
Awesome. Uh, Nelson, I'm going to ask you the same question. If you could just please introduce yourself and your work.
Good evening. Oh,
You're good. You're good.
okay. Yeah, so I am, my name is Nelson Salvador. I am currently the Director of Organizing of Hawaii Worker Center. I started in 2023. It's a small organization organizing non-union workers or workers that are not yet member of the unions. So you have them, there are more of them than the unionized workers in Hawaii. As the latest data says, it's 26% only are unionized in the state of Hawaii. So what we are trying to be is to be a opportunity of organizing those that are not represented by the unions, and you can find them in the restaurants, in the utilities, laundry rooms, and healthcare that are abounds in Hawaii, just like in other states of the U.S. Yeah, so we are finding a lot of things that I thought I cannot see, I will not, and will never see in the U.S., like wage theft, um, non-payment of benefits, and everything that the workers are enduring because they just need the job.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And last but of course not least, Louis, if you could please introduce yourself and your work.
Hi. Check. Hello. Good. Yes. My name is Louis Bernardo. I'm restorative nursing assistant for over 25 years at Halinani Rehabilitation and Nursing Center. Currently, I'm a shop steward now. I've been shop steward since 2015, I believe. And my job as a shop steward is to make sure we enforce the contract. I represent my workers who are called for discipline. And yeah, that's an advocate for new workers to come over to make sure they've been supported when they come over. So it's good to be a shop steward and as well as advocator for new workers too. And I've been doing so, and I'm very active right now as shop steward. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Back to Dr. Cachola. Moving back to the history. Historically, how have workers in Hawaii been abused?
Um, so from, I did want to say that to connect to the history of the Haymarket Affair, that a lot of the ideas of the American and the European workers in the late 1880s, it did circulate internationally. So in 1889, the European socialists and labor organizers declared May 1st as International Workers' Day in honor of the Haymarket Affair. And also during this time, colored people of the global south globalized and migrated to the global north. There and was exchange of workers along these supply lines of empire. For example, Ilocano Ilustrado Isabelo de los Reyes learned about the anarcho-syndicalist ideas of trade unionism while he was imprisoned in Barcelona, Spain, and he brought those ideas back to the Philippines. He worked with Hermenegildo Cruz to organize Philippine trade unions in the late 1890s. And it was interactions like these between workers in struggle from different parts of the world that the 8-hour workday became a global issue beyond just America. And so I also want to connect to Hawaii because in the 1850s to the 1890s, Hawaii was also being contacted a lot by capitalism at this time, and it was integrating into the Great Mahele was happening at this time. And so Western merchants would buy up the land that was for Maka'ainana, or the working class Hawaiians. And American lawyers influenced King Kauikeaouli III to manage contract workers through the Masters and Servants Act. And during this time, Native and immigrant laborers suffered abuses like whipping and imprisonment if they refused work. And so Kauikeaouli, he tried to intervene in the exploitation of workers through the 1852 Constitution to abolish slavery. But Western businesses' interests would force the later king, Kalakaua, to sign the Bayonet Constitution of 1887, taking away a lot of the voting rights of the Maka'ainana working people and even the Asian immigrants that were here. And also the eventual overthrow of the Queen Liliuokalani in 1893 that basically took a U.S. ended up taking control, or the Republic of Hawaii, and then working with the United States to take over and annex Hawaii in 1898. And so since then, the Big Five corporate oligarchy would control Hawaii's economy through low wages and racial pay discrimination known as the Bango tag system. And the European and US imperial wars in the region displaced people in Asia, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. And Euro-American sugar planters recruited and trafficked displaced peoples from war-torn nations to become the cheap laborers for their plantation colonies, like here in Hawaii, and also utilizing Kanaka Maoli labor to go into different shipping lines that work in the US West Coast, as well as other parts of the Pacific. And so, so the next question is going to be about resistance, or?
The next question I have for you is about how militant labor organizing affected Hawaii's history.
Okay, so you want me to wait till after everyone answers the previous one, or?
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Cachola. As she said, you know, the history of workers in Hawaii and across the world has been riddled with abuse, and that the motive for that abuse is it's more profitable to do it that way. And Nelson gave us a great segue in the last section that, he saw things that he never thought he would see here, and that the abuses have not stopped. There's still labor abuses today. So my next question, starting with Yoko, is what are some examples of labor abuses that you've seen in your work?
Okay, so outside of being with HNA throughout my career as a labor activist, I've seen so many different types of labor abuses, especially against the most vulnerable peoples. So overseas workers, undocumented workers, and I've met cruise ship workers who quote unquote jumped ship in Florida because they were engineers who were hired in as engineers but used as housekeepers. And while there's no shame in being a housekeeper, this event essentially makes their visas null and void. And so when you work in a position that's not what's on your visa, you are undocumented. So they did not mean to be undocumented. They didn't overstay. They did everything. They paid a recruiter tens of thousands of pesos to get a job, or maybe hundreds of thousands. Sorry, tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So that they could get a job with a reputable employer in America, right, in the US. And this happens all the time. I've seen so many of these cases. For the Florida 15, we called them the Florida 15 because 15 of them, they fled up to New Jersey, and they were living collectively, and they found us, NAFCON, National Alliance for Filipino Concerns, because they saw on GMA that we'd won back wages for 27 Sentosa nurses who were nurses from the Philippines, similar situation, working in Long Island, New York, in a healthcare facility. Without getting paid much of what was contractually obligated to them. And the employer was actually trying to file that they had abandoned their patients because they were like, well, you're not paying us. And so from labor trafficking to dangerous like occupational safety hazards, like for cruise ship workers especially, or any kind of ship workers. Did you know that's the most dangerous job in the entire world? Because a lot of times, if the employer doesn't like you, you might fall off a ship. That has happened. We have documented cases like that. And aside from the big stuff like trafficking, the most and death, murder, the most common labor abuse I see is wage theft, just like Nelson had said. Wage theft can literally happen to anyone. It doesn't always look like the employer withholding your entire check, and being like, ha ha ha, you don't get any money because you have no say. I'm big and you're small, right? Like it doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it even happens at the largest private employer in Hawaii. And it can happen really easily by not taking your contractually stipulated breaks. You literally allow your wages to be stolen. So, and that's just like a simple example. So, I'm always saying that the best thing you can do as a worker is to know your rights and never let the employer take a single cent of your hard earned wages.
Snaps for that. I would also like to add that one of my coworkers experienced wage theft by being placed incorrectly on the salary schedule, and the employer was very non-transparent about it. But through our union, it was able to get fixed. So the same question I have for you, Nelson, is what are some examples of labor abuses that you have seen in your work?
Back in the Philippines, actually, cheap labor is where you could actually see by the bounds. I mean, like right now, the Philippines minimum wage is $11 a day. Our minimum wage here is $16 an hour, so it's not even equals to an 8-hour work back in the Philippines. So, but yeah, it happens because just like the working class doesn't have anything than their work, their ability to work, their manpower, and they are selling this manpower to have or to earn a decent living. And so it is always that there is a contradiction between the worker and the employer, where there is a distinct difference between their motive, where the employer thinks of profit while the worker just thinks of living, uh, just have a decent living. When I started at Hawaii Worker Center, I never thought that I will see a a situation where those Filipinos that came here were trying to earn a better wages for their family, ended up being abused, being how do you call it, tricked, or like they wanted to make them believe that they have been uh, good enough because they are sending dollars back home, but they are being uh, they're being robbed of their wages by misclassifying them as salaried rather than an hourly workers. So, but it's not that they came to Hawaii Worker Center for that purpose. Actually, they came because they wanted to have a pathway to permanent residency, and they were actually asking, when we retire, can we actually enjoy the benefits that we've been paying SS and Medicare? And so um, I was very new to FL, SA, and I really didn't know how to answer them. But um, we had to help them. And so what we did is we gathered lawyers and people from the Department of Labor uh, to ask them the question that these workers are asking. And in the course of discussion, the Department of Labor asked them a very simple question. He asked them, "Sir, do you chop your vegetable?" Because he should be a chef in a restaurant. And that very question, very simple question, he answered, "Yes, I do it all." And then the Department of Labor said, "Then you are not a chef. Will you come to the office and let's investigate?" Cut the long story short, they were misclassified as chef. They are actually cooks because they are, and they've been working 14 to 15 hours, 14 to 14 years, 15 years with 60 to 80 hours a week. And they are not being paid overtime because they are classified as salaried, uh, permanent, exempt. So, I mean, it's it's a lot of things. They are made to believe that they're good, but in effect, they're being robbed of their dignity, uh, and they were not able to go back to the Philippines for 15 years. One had a 7-month-old daughter when he went out of the Philippines, and he had never seen him. I seen her up to this very moment. Uh, so the sacrifice is not just the tendency to be abused. The sacrifice is more than, because it is the sacrifice of the family, the sacrifice of seeing and trying to contribute in your daughters, your sons, learning the abacada or the ABC, or just to walk and to run and to climb a tree. Oh, I can go on and on.
No, thank you for sharing. And that's, yeah. Yeah. And thank you for reminding us all that the impact of these labor abuses, this wage theft, it's not just the money, it's the impact on workers' lives and their families' lives because of this. It has real impacts. Um, yeah. And next up, I'm going to ask you the same question, Louis. What are some examples of labor abuses that you've seen in your work?
Um, it's my experience as a restorative nursing assistant. Recently, during the past year, we've seen how companies became more dirty with how they abuse workers. Even though we do have already have the collective bargaining agreement, they still try to sneak some things in there. Just like a good example is they try to take away half an hour of our 8 hours work shift. They cut down our 8 hours work shift into 7.5 hours. That's like losing our race for the whole year. So it's not good. It affects us financially. It affects us how we can perform our job better. But we did file for grievance for that abuse the company did. So we were able to win arbitration, and we were able to get the retro pay. So yeah, it is on the process right now. Hopefully we can get it by next month or so. And another thing, that's important thing that I'll tell you is, on my part as a restorative nursing assistant, this is another thing that the abuse from the company, that they try to put our working hours to 6 hours, 8 hours to 6 hours. So naturally, they need more CNAs to work on the floors. They pull us out as restorative nursing assistants to do certified nursing assistant job. So our job as restorative nursing assistants were neglected. Those patients who've been getting restorative programs, exercising, ambulation, range of motion, they never do that. Nobody did exercises, so most of the patients have declined ADLs. So that's another abuse that is not acceptable. But since we had fulfilled the bargaining, we were able to make strong language with on our part as restorative nursing assistants to be not pulled as CNAs on the floor. So we can provide the services that our residents needed. So our residents are so happy to come back to our restorative nursing programs right now. So it's a good thing we have a strong language with regards to restorative nursing. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Louis, for sharing. And again, I think you brought up a good point that it's not just the workers that suffer from these abuses. Like you mentioned, the restorative nursing aides, that impacts your ability to care for your patients. And it shows up in, like you said, the rate of their recovery. Uh, I'm a teacher, and something that we say is that teachers' working conditions are students' learning conditions. And for all workers who do the important work of taking care of other people in one way or another, those people are also impacted by these labor abuses. And your story really highlighted that. Um, we spent the last 20 or so minutes talking about, some heavy stuff of the the cost of these labor abuses and the harm that can be done by essentially greedy capitalists. However, the reason we're here today is that there is something that we as workers can do. And I'm surrounded by people who have a lot more experience and knowledge than me on that. So I'd love to bring it back to Dr. Cachola. How did militant labor organizing affect Hawaii's history? And I'm going to quickly recap the way that I described militant labor organizing. Although, like I said, if these guys say something different than me, go with what they say. The way that I described it was building people power, building worker power, and, sort of the power of being connected, building relationships with your fellow workers. Everyone's critically thinking, teaching themselves and each other, and they're willing to fight for themselves, for their fellow workers, and for the people that they take care of in their work through primarily the power of the strike. I'll give it up to Dr. Cachola.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing your stories. So I go back into time again, into the history of Hawaii's labor organizing, and a lot of it is kind of familiar moments if you'd like to read about it. So despite the illegal annexation that took place, the worker resistance really peaked in the territory period, which was the time after the overthrow. And the 1946 Great Sugar Strike marked a turning point of worker organizing by innovating from earlier ethnic specific actions to broad inter-ethnic collaboration. And this was led by Kanaka Maoli migrant worker Harry Kamoku, who learned from the docks of San Francisco how to unify Hawaii plantation workers who are populated from different workers from Asia, from Europe, from America, and here in Hawaii in the Pacific. And the way that he looked at it was organizing workers across the industrial lines of production. And at the time, it was agriculture. So those were the people working in the plantation fields, the factory, and the docks. And so his method was yes, we understand everybody is different, and there was, teasing and different kinds of things that the Big Five would try to implement the culture of racism and racial hierarchy, but we cannot utilize their perspective. We need to see the bigger problem is taking control of our economy, and that is to connecting the people who work in these different sectors of the agricultural economy. And so a lot of his work was about challenging the racial hierarchies. And through that interconnection of people and the vision of how they can take control of their exploitation from the Big Five, they were able to win the collective bargaining rights for agricultural workers. So the law had already passed. The National Labor Relations Act had already passed before 1946, and but it wasn't applicable to Hawaii's agricultural workers. It was only applicable to transportation, like railroad workers in the continent. And so they needed to create a Hawaii-based law in order to have agricultural workers have the right to collectively bargain. And so their demand for the 1946 Great Sugar Strike was to have that law here and to have it respected and practiced and by their employers. And so the other aspect of militant organizing was that the workers' movement knew that they needed to also participate in Hawaii's governance. And so that's when the children of the plantation workers entered into the territorial government as politicians, the Democratic Revolution. And this was again them seeing that they could, the deterrent of working in the workplace was one level of change, but there was all these policies, and the Big Five was still passing these laws, and so they saw that that avenue needed to also have representation of workers' values. And so through laws, these politicians that entered into the government, their values was to be opposite of what the Big Five did. And so these workers wanted to control private corporations. They wanted to prioritize public welfare. And so that is why Hawaii is the most progressive in the United States in terms of our democratic laws and our policies here in terms of social welfare. We're not perfect, but if you compare us to other states, we treat our people generally good. I mean, there's a lot of problems, but still, I think comparison to other states. And then following statehood in 1959, there's a lot of debates about statehood, but I think what was animating for the workers to see the hope of being the 50th state was that they were inspired by the civil rights and the labor movements in the continent. Again, Hawaii's labor law comes from the continent, the National Labor Relations Act. And then they were also inspired by the work of the Black movement in terms of Martin Luther King, and that resonated with Hawaii's working class that just came out of a racial hierarchy. And so they saw hope in those policies. And so I think that was one genealogy that led to the popularity of statehood, even though there are other debates around what that moment meant. And so today we do have the 1979 Hawaii State Constitution, which has enshrined labor rights alongside Hawaiian rights and environmental rights. So I think there's different expressions of militants from protesting, but also in political organizing. And also, statehood also meant the decline of plantations and the rise of tourism. And the working class people also animated the Hawaiian Renaissance in the fight against the evictions. Because at this time, Kalama Valley, Chinatown, Otakam, the state sought to redevelop all of these communities to look nice for tourists and second home buyers. And so those are working class communities that were being evicted from their homes and challenged in that way. And also working class communities were part of the fight against the militarism in Kaho'olawe. This was during the time of the Vietnam War. But in the 1990s, the overdevelopment continued and the militarism continued. So there is still, I think the shift in the economy from the agriculture to the tourism industry really shuffled the cards, shuffled the base of our workers. And also the globalization continued on. And so an unregulated capital, we have, I think, communication broke down between different cultures, different workers in different sectors. So I think there's a call for, kind of how can we go back to cross-cultural organizing, and also how do we understand our economy right now?
Thank you for that. Excuse me. Thank you for that historical perspective. And you bring up a good point that it's not just, there's not one way to do militant labor organizing, that they were also getting into political office, and that, we live in a, we live in a very complicated system, and that it's going to take multiple approaches to get the things that we as workers need. I'm going to Nelson. How about we start with you this time? My question.
Are you sure you want to do that?
You were so good last time. My question for you is, how has militant labor organizing benefited your goals, either with the Hawaii Worker Center or in your past organizing in the Philippines?
Yeah, it really depends on how we define militant, and we define how we define radical. Um, because as to the workers, actually, um, what defines them is their relationship with their employer. What defines them is how that relationship actually um, make them whole, or make them their dignity as workers, and not as slaves. Of course, we came from the workers came from a slave society, where people work and not being paid. But then again, when the Industrial Revolution started, and had that relationship of being paid, they are still being paid with the slave wages. Um, so back in the Philippines, this kind of the relationship between the workers and their employers is what defines them as individuals, and that definitions actually comes the aspiration as workers, um, how to improve as a working class. If you say you're a working class, then what does that mean? Uh, so I saw a lot of organizing in the Philippines, where we do teach in on wage, work wages and profits, uh, and that actually is very essential into defining how a worker should aspire as a working class, as to his relationship with her employer or his employer. Um, Back here, when I started with Hawaii Worker Center, um, we did that. We used that study to show how the max workers are defining the relationship with their employers, and they were able to find out that uh, their employers are working receiving CEO level of wages, while they are receiving pittance to compared to what they're doing, but they are all classified as workers in the company. And so these things actually are where I define the militancy, I define the radical thing, that you could do in organizing. So meaning the militancy should change the definition of your relationship with your employer, that you could have your dignity as a worker and as an individual, as a person, while working with that kind of relationship. I don't know if I sounded. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that's you brought up an interesting point about how people might be, classified officially as workers, but receiving such a massive pay disparity, and that the the way that workers in that situation perceive that and feel their dignity, or feel that they're being indignified by that situation, and that can really affect their class consciousness, for lack of a better word. um let's move on to Louis, how has militant labor organizing benefited your goals?
Military labor organizing, it helps us a lot uh, with our experiences as workers at Halinani. You know, every company, they're dirty. They try. It's either they run you over, they make you, they abuse you. It's either you quit or fight back. So most of the workers, we chose to fight back. That's why it helps us achieve our goals in making our pay higher. Our it secures it secures our job, that even the company sells the company now or later, we are part of the bargaining that they have to absorb the workers. And it secures our medical insurance, that we have to pay certain amount lock for the next 2 years. It gave us staffing, better staffing. So it is militant labor organizing help us a lot in achieving our goals through our experiences. So it's very important to fight. And then we have also struck against our company twice before, and we have served multiple strike notices. And then also we did many rallies against the company. That's why we know that we get the power. So that's how it helped us achieve our goals up to now. Thank you.
Oh, and that's awesome to hear about how you and your coworkers have that fighting spirit and that understanding that that's that's sometimes what it takes to win the rights that you deserve. Uh, let's move on to Yoko. How has militant labor organizing benefited your goals?
Okay, so you don't stand a chance against these massive employers, especially since they're all in cahoots with one another, unless you can truly demonstrate that you have a critical mass of workers to withhold their labor, right? Because they will call your bluff. And so even if everyone theoretically agrees that we're stronger together, it's really, really, really hard still to get everyone to agree to stand together. So at our last campaign at Queens, for instance, it took months and months and months of pounding linoleum, as I like to say, in the hospitals. But eventually, even just the threat of a strike can also be very powerful. Because in January of 2025, 2,000 nurses at Queens were ready to go on strike at 7 a.m. We were at the bargaining table down to the minute. And at 2 a.m. on the day of the strike, we won a contract. The first in the state to get staffing ratios without having to go on strike. So in terms of the militant aspect, I would say it took a lot to get our stewards and our like organizing action team members to really think about how to talk to their coworkers and do it every day. I think a lot of us, especially post-COVID, are like, well, I don't really like talking to people like at all. And that part is hard to and to me militancy is discipline. It's creativity. And it's just doing it over and over again till it works. Can I talk about my past life?
Of course.
Okay. Because I will be remiss, because the most militant labor organizing I know is in the Philippines, of course. In a shipyard, when it was called Hanjin, I was integrating with the workers there. They all lived in one community. 40,000, I think it was the number of the workers. They had the worst conditions, bad protective equipment that would literally cause blindness for people who were welding, because they were staring, when you're welding, the fire is very bright, for 12 hours straight. Their shifts were 12 hours, like nurses. And exhaustion would make them literally fall off the platforms as they're building the hull of these giant ships. So if you can imagine, right, this is how you build a ship, everyone, that you build it like one side first. And so the hull of the ship is round, right? And so imagine like you have to go around it, and it's very tall, like stories high, many, many stories high. And so you're dangling from like rope, when you watch like window washers and you're like, wow, that looks really dangerous. Imagine that, but without OSHA. Because in export processing zones in the Philippines, there are no laws. So that they can do anything. And so what Kilusang Mayuno, KMU, the most militant worker union in the Philippines, what they would do was they would organize health clinics to they'll check people's eyes, right? Blood pressure, all those things, make sure that they're getting medication and whatnot to prevent the whatever, all of the the other stuff that happens from the type of work that they were doing. And then they did these things like PPE shares. So and the employer said this was illegal, whatever. Who cares? Where if you had good enough equipment, and you were day shift, you would then pass on to the night shift, because nobody was given good PPE, and thus saved a lot of lives, right? In Mindanao, I integrated with the Dole plantation workers. Yes, Dole. And the entire union leadership was arrested on the day that I arrived, because they had just won their union elections. And so they all got arrested because in the Philippines, many employers use the police as their private security, and they tried to fabricate these charges on these trade unionists, like possession of grenades, murder, whatever they could imagine. Really far-fetched stuff, guys. And from them, I learned that if you are effective, the employer and the state will try to make your life really, really hard. But I also learned that if you are effective, the masses will march down to the police precinct, to the holding center, bang down those doors and free their leaders, and make sure the police throw out the case, right? The cases. And from KMU and its affiliate unions, I've also learned the effectiveness of creativity. My favorite action, and if you've ever heard me talk about this, I'm sorry, I say it all the time. My favorite action was the P-in. Yeah. Okay. So when you call literally any company, the your bank, the airlines, Target, whatever, right? All of those call centers are in the Philippines, right? And so there were these call center workers who were not allowed to take any bathroom breaks because 5 minutes away from your phone or from your little cubicle is 5 minutes less of productive time, 5 minutes less of profits, right? So it was like really, really terrible. But the union, they organized something called a pee-in. Very creative. And since the employer didn't let them go to pee, they would ask, "Can I go pee?" And when they weren't allowed to pee, they would pee right there in their seats. And within, I think it was like 10 minutes to an hour, everyone gets bathroom breaks anytime they want it. Like super effective. And so that's kind of the picture of militant organizing that I know of.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for sharing that, sometimes effective tactics are unorthodox, to say the least. But it really highlights the lack of dignity that a lot of these workers are facing. Let's throw it back to Dr. Cachola. Can you elaborate on the importance of factors like ethnicity, gender, and nationality on labor exploitation?
Okay. I have pictures. Zoom in. Sorry, not these pictures. So this one. Okay. So the concept of nation I'm going to speak international and to give the context for the different identity positions and try to get to where we are today in Hawaii and our economy and our workers. But the concept of nation has often been utilized by elites to align national production with their own social class interests. So I was studying the non-alignment movement recently to prepare for this presentation of the 1950s, because this was a time of the decolonization movements in Africa and Asia who were seeking national independence from capitalism and communism. And I went there because I was trying to understand the history of international workers' movements and how we see examples of it in America and Europe. But then I was like, so how did it get to the third world? And so I got into this non-alignment movement history. And so this was a hopeful time, right? In the 1950s, they were decolonizing. African countries and Asian countries were decolonizing from former colonial masters. And so, but what happened after is that the former European powers, they started to innovate their colonial tactics by intervening in democratically elected leaders. And then they would implement these puppet leaders who would turn the country into a client state that's dependent on foreign aid. Now, there's different examples of this happening. But what really happened was the idealism of the non-alignment movement kind of fell apart. And the global South nations led to a little internal conflicts because a lot of the puppet leaders ended up becoming, militaristic and supremacists. And so a lot of their marginalized workers, like women, ethnic minorities, LGBT, migrants, would be excluded or violated in different ways by their society, by these policies. And so, these are the contexts for what's happening right now in different countries, Sudan, even the Philippines. different parts of Latin America, and why all these folks from the global south are migrating to the global north, which is America, Europe, or even here in Hawaii. And so, you know, so a lot of these migrants are coming, but at the same time, our working class issues are also not really, we're not happy too locally. And so just kind of calling for a working class analysis these days, I think we need to understand where these migrants are coming from, and the histories and how it connects to our economy here and how we have been doing. So ethnicity is that concept that allows people to connect through shared language, shared culture, and usually it helps to build trust in communication. When you see your kababayan, if you see the person of your culture, it kind of helps you to understand better information. And also, when we understand where these people are coming from, it helps us to understand their context, and we can understand also their histories of resistance that help us connect on that hopeful note of like, we see our oppression, but what do we do about it? You do have a genealogy of resistance as well. And so if we can connect on that, the problem, but also the hopefulness of resisting, then it helps the struggle to build our movement in terms of our values and our connection. And also through ethnicity, it also is a doorway to understand people's country and the economies that they came from, and how when we analyze other countries' economies, just like how our panelists here are talking a lot about the Philippines economy, how does that interconnect with the Hawaii economy? And that way we can have that transnational understanding of why folks are migrating. What are the economies that force them to leave? But also, where are they plugging themselves here? And how does that affect them too? And then how do we situate ourselves economically in relation to them? And so this is, in our current global economy, the people who are aware of ethnicity can be bridges, cross-cultural individuals who can help translate these histories, these issues, and help talk to different cultural groups, bring them together in one room to talk about our political economies and how do we organize from our different positions. The other aspect of indigeneity is, these are my big terms, but the indigeneity, I wanted to mention that because it's different from ethnicity, but it's also kind of related to this idea of nation in certain ways. But I think that indigeneity, it basically means that people have the right to stay in their homelands, and that to resist being pushed out by capitalist-driven colonialism, or people call it settler colonialism, and how settler colonialism is enacted by people who internalize capitalism for various reasons, because they need to work or it's profitable for them. And so these can be the elites and the bosses of resource-hungry industries, as well as disciplined workers who just want to follow what their bosses say. But I think indigeneity, it has been an important framework that I've learned here in Hawaii, and it's just a framework that helps us fight for an economy that is not about colonizing and taking over other people's lands and bodies. And I know we're not there yet. I know we're still kind of stuck in colonial industries and capitalism, but I think indigeneity pushes us to like, how do we bring this kind of conversation up in our workers' demands, in our vision for organizing, and get there? Because as workers, we are inside the machinations of our jobs. We have more power to redirect how our work works and how our industry works because we're inside of it. So I feel that workers would be a very powerful force in articulating what this means in the economy way, in the way that our industry functions. And then gender. So I was thinking a lot about gender because I think it's about men, women, and LGBT and how we treat each other. And so capitalism enforces a nuclear family myth to reproduce more bodies, to be workers and technically docile workers. But families and workplaces can also be falsely indoctrinated to punish those who don't fit in these roles and these expectations of reproduction. And so gender analysis has been about sensing how power is practiced within organizations. I mean, when I'm talking about sensing power, it's like if you grow up in a family where there are, where there's abuse, right? You can sense when the anger is coming and the violence is coming, and so this is a skill of like understanding power relations, and I think that skill is applicable not just in family but also in workplace organizations. So I've been thinking a lot about what happened with the iconic labor leader Cesar Chavez and why his female co-organizer Dolores Huerta waited all of these years to publicly expose the sexual assault that she was experiencing by him, and as well as those daughters of his fellow co-organizers that were also being molested and abused. I mean, it's like why they, it's the organizational structure. There's something wrong with that in that labor movement. Is the organization patriarchal top-down leadership where the members don't have a voice and they have to follow one line just to keep everything strong, looking strong? Or is it feminist, queer, collaborative in approach where leaders share power with members to allow for inclusion of ideas and accountability to different needs? So this is again an idea like how can I mean I feel like it does happen with our generation of organizers who identify in these different ways. But I think it's a tool. Um, yeah. Is there a last question or is it the end?
The last question I have for you is about the importance of solidarity across the working class.
Thank you.
But yeah, thank you for all that you share. You had some really great ideas and important history there. So quick round of applause. And yeah, we are, to put it simply, in the belly of the beast, trying to build organizing power to change that, to fight against that. But like you mentioned, there are a lot of sad examples where organizations, nation states, or movements that are claiming to be for the working class to make these changes fall victim to a capitalistic or hierarchical or all of the other um, big words that you said about you know hegemonic
Throwing in more.
a harmful top-down abusive patriarchal power structure, and that we have to be better than that. If we're going to build something better than that, we have to practice it ourselves. And I appreciate you offering also the visions of collaborative, inclusive, feminist leadership and following the model of the what indigenous people are indigeneity. Yeah, like that knowledge and that wisdom of respecting people and the land. And that I want to now ask our other panelists about how they're putting some of these things into practice. So, Nelson, you want to start again? Don't worry, Louis. You got the next one. My question for all of you is, how have you organized around ethnic, gender, national lines or any other sort of identity lines to protect the most vulnerable while building united people power? I can say that again if you want. It was a lot of words.
I don't know if I have a experience to that uh, deep differences. I have been in Hawaii, where there's a lot of nationalities and ethnicities. But of course, we are only exposed to the most, to the low wage earners, and we are only right now finding the Filipinos and COFA workers. um, as our example, as our rates, we are still very small organization though. So these are the rates that we are actually having this years. But I mean, back home we have different types of cultural uh, differences among Filipinos. Actually, uh, we are divided regionally back home, where the um, the power, those that handle has the power actually would like to use this type of regionalism as a tool to uh, prevent unity. Uh, but one of the things that we are finding actually is that when the interest, the common interest of the people are the ones being attacked by those holding power, whatever language you use, whatever cultural ethnicity you have, you can unite. So it's like um, that's the language of uh, your common interest. That's the language of your class that unites and that it transcends ethnicity, it transcends cultural differences, it transcends even educational uh, uh, attainment. Uh, it's just unite people. Um, and so this is very powerful thing among the working class, because if that interest actually is endangered, then even if you cannot think, you cannot uh, speak English well, you can unite with people uh, that you are working with, because what unites you is more than language. It's the interest of your uh, humanity. It's the interest of who you are as a worker.
Thank you. That was powerful. And I mean, we heard from Dr. Cachola about the capitalist playbook to divide the working class along all of these lines, and you talked about it too, Nelson. But I was really inspired by what you said about the ability to transcend that. So thank you for that. Same question for you. Um, so Louis, how have you organized around ethnic, gender, and or national lines to protect the most vulnerable while building united people power?
Honestly, um, I have not organized uh, around ethnic, gender, national lines, but with regards to my union, United here Local 5, whatever organized.
Well, I guess if I can ask, would you is your building like gender or ethnically diverse in any way, or
It's basically we're mostly we are mostly the workers at my workplace are around 90% Filipinos. So it's not a problem communicating with each other. That's why we have the culture of being togetherness. We never encounter discrimination with each other. So it's you don't see it organizing is not a problem with regards to, and yeah, we communicate with each other, and being practicing the same culture, we have good relationship. So basically, we don't have problems that really matters. So yeah, I'm proud of that one, what we have, man. Thank you.
I appreciate your honesty. Um, no, and like context is everything with regards to organizing from what I've learned, and that different contexts are going to require different nuance in the way that you build your power. Um, let's move to Yoko. How have you organized around ethnic, gender, and or national lines to protect the most vulnerable while building united people power?
I only just realized that I should be looking at the audience. Hello.
The owl will find you.
Um, while I do have a dream of building out like different caucuses or for different ethnic or affinity groups, I'm not there yet in my current work. But the very first campaign that I ever took part of as a wee 18-year-old was with CAV, Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence. And this was mostly with Chinese communities in Chinatown and Cambodians in the Bronx. And as you would expect, having speakers of specific languages would immediately build trust, especially if they're like very like smaller regional languages, not just Cantonese, Mandarin, but Fujianese and Toasan and Khmer and all the different littler languages. Um, and that being like kind of your hook first. It's not your reason for organizing, but it's your hook to bring in people. Um, and then from there, we would gather folks and raise analysis to anti-gentrification, anti-slumlord, anti-capitalist even. And that was just baseline, right? So that way, when Black Lives Matter became a movement in 2013, 2014, we were already ready to talk about and address the anti-Blackness in our Asian communities. Um, and then when Peter Liang, a Chinese NYPD officer, killed Akai Gurley, a Black man in Brooklyn, they were also able to mobilize resources to support the family of Akai Gurley and combat the common like narratives that were being plastered all over the place by the New York Post. And just like because the the powers that be are looking for every way to divide us. Um, and it's super easy to do that when, like xenophobic framework is very just commonplace and um like a lot of our folks like like our parents, I don't know, your parents, uh have some backwards ideas, right? And so it's easy to like just capitalize on that and use that to divide folks, and that's why it's so important to organize. um Another example is one of the first groups I was part of organizing was Filipino domestic workers. And so the framework here was women's organizing. So women's work being invisible, undervalued, women as vulnerable workers to labor and sexual abuse from the employers, women as already vulnerable for having, 1 in 4 women are, survivors of sexual assault already, like all those uniting factors of being um a woman, but also being Filipino and then also being a domestic worker, um was the framework for their workers' rights organizing. And then it wasn't just us, there were also other groups organizing, the Vietnamese along these same lines, the Jamaicans, the Koreans, the Haitians, all the domestic workers. And it was through that uniting all these different groups and then coming together that we were able to get the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights signed in New York. And then in the Philippines, I learned that the fight for national sovereignty is a fight for workers' rights. It's a fight for women's rights. It's a fight for indigenous people's rights. It's a fight for queer rights, and so on. So nationalism can be, for oppressed peoples, an incredibly uniting factor, which I think is why, like, May Day is like the largest rally in most countries annually, because they're like the combination of the workers' struggle and the struggle for national sovereignty kind of being very intertwined. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I appreciated hearing about your experience and how ethnic, gender, national identity can be, for like you said, for oppressed people, like a source of strength and the solidarity that you all were able to show for each other when all of those things happen. So thank you for that. On that theme, we're going to throw it back to Dr. Cachola. What is the importance of solidarity across the working class?
Get pizza. Yeah, I'll encourage you guys to eat just so that we can get that stuff.
Yeah, you guys can eat.
Yeah. Um, but I think solidarity is really important today because of what we're experiencing right now with the administration, and the Trump and the corporate elites are basically making billions by limiting wages and overworking us. And then there's the AI stealing our information to feed machines that would eventually replace us. And this is across, I think a lot of us might be thinking of it workplace specific too. If you're a union, you kind of look at it from your own industry. But what's happening is the privatizing and even the weaponizing of our infrastructure, the basic infrastructure that we use to communicate, even the infrastructure of traveling, um, and how a lot of these, if there are privatizing our infrastructure, it's also it's affecting workers across all sectors and across all industry types, and not even just being workers, like as family members, as individuals. And here in Hawaii, we have tourism, military, education, construction, healthcare, transportation, agriculture, various office administrative jobs in the state and federal, policy level kind of jobs. Um, and so I think all of us probably have some experience of having shady experiences with our rights as workers, and what's going to happen to our uncertainty of the viability of our jobs and our position in them. And I think our I'm very proud of our Hawaii labor history, because I think the way that they fight reminds us that the workers are not their jobs. Yeah, workers are not our jobs, right? We are people with culture, history, and agency who organize and articulate how our jobs and overall political economy should support our families and our communities. I think that was what was very inspiring to me when I kind of read about the history. And I think class analysis is also very powerful and important, because it's a framework that calls workers of different job types, of different sectors to talk. We have to kind of come together to talk about what's going on in our jobs and in our workplace, and also what's going on in the overall political economy that we live in. And I think through that talking, we build trust and build more comfort with. I know the fight is often in our own jobs, right? We're fighting in our own sectors. But then when we're looking at the privatization and weaponization of infrastructure, we need to have a collective coalitional conversation, which I know we can do. We have coalitions. I've seen them happen. But I think now is a good time again to bring that up. Um, and I think that the conversations about ethnicity, indigeneity, and gender and class are all important calling, like how Yoko said, like you can call people and they'll feel like, okay, I can have a conversation. And then as organizers kind of collect us in one place to have bigger conversations about, we hear you, what's going on for your experience, but what is really, how are our issues connected to the current political economy, and also what are we going to do about it together. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Um, yeah, I think something that I have dealt with in my organizing, my brief experience, is trying to help people see the bigger picture of not just their individual experience, but the collective experience, and how, like, we're all being screwed in different ways, but like by the same, you know, giants of the people in power, essentially. So thank you for sharing. And I like what you said, that workers are not their jobs. We are people. I try to remember that as a teacher. Louis, you're up. Um, my question for you is, has solidarity from the wider working class helped you in your struggles? If so, how?
Yes, of course. Being a member of the United Here Local 5, we have brothers and sisters from the hotels industry, um, and also from Kaiser Permanente. You know, during the past years, they have been helping us during our fights, on our strikes, on rallies. We have um, many employees, not employees, organizers coming out from those properties. They came over to help us organize our property in Halinani, and I'm very thankful for that one. Um, yeah, it is. They have supported us, tremendous support with regards to the actions that we did from the past years of fighting. So it shows the support from these other properties of our union. So I appreciate it a lot, and I'm very thankful to have a very good union. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I can only imagine the how that must feel to have, you know, folks from the wider working class from other hotels or work sites come out to support you. That's awesome. Yoko, this one's for you. Has solidarity from the wider working class helped you in your struggles? If so, how?
Okay. Well, uh, you kind of have to be a bad person to not support nurses. So, um, it's it's been easier to garner like that wider support for, nurses, and because they're fighting for patient care, right? Like you're fighting for your family members. Nobody is invincible to illness. They're gonna need a nurse someday. And so there's like a lot of respect in the profession. Um, and while I think that lends a hand in like how we receive support, what I'm still struggling on, honestly, is how to get our folks to show up for others. And I'm not to say like, yeah, nurses don't care about anybody but themselves. No, like, that is not what I'm saying.
Of course.
There are many individuals who are, supporting different struggles on their own and whatnot. But I mean, like, really, like as a united group of something, to really not just know in your mind that we're all intrinsically connected, but to like show up in a way that can make the, you know, the fake state like shake, right? And honestly, like on a whole, right? Like personally feel kind of hopeless these days, right? With the world on fire. Like, have you seen those internet memes that are like in France, they just like start lighting stuff on fire as soon as their gas prices go up. But like after everything, should I stop?
No,
'Cause,
you're
okay.
good.
After all of the things, you know, as we're like under so much pressure of the crushing imperialist machine, like, and finally gas prices going up, like, where are we on burning down this, you know, the state apparatus? You know, like, so we have so much work to do. Um, and yeah, like it's I, please take it away from me before I go down here. No, we have so much work to do, and it is hopeful that there are people gathered in this room and online. It is hopeful that there are people doing work in their specific sectors, in their specific groups and whatnot, and we can't just be waiting for the day. We it's really very, very clear, I'm sure to all of us, preaching to the choir, how we need to really step it up and do the militant organizing. Every single one of our neighbors, we should know them. Every single of our coworkers, we should know them, and we should, you know, aim to use that power to change our conditions for the better.
Yeah, thank you. You brought up some great points about, you know, the importance of taking some action in these times. And, you know, elephant in the room, it is dark times, and, you know, scary, but it is hopeful that people are gathered here to learn, and people, you know, all over the world are doing things in their little spaces to make that bit of a difference. Um, Nelson, I'm going to ask you the same question. Has solidarity from the wider working class helped you in your struggles? If so, how?
I don't know if I really fathom the depth of the question. Uh, of course, as a person, the the working class always, in a sense, placed me for I am at now, something that um, it's this class that actually made me as who am I as a person, um, uh, embracing the this class, though I am now I'm a bourgeois person, but I'm trying to embrace the working class. And this is actually, I mean, it how it helped me in my struggle when I came here, because my life is endangered because of Duterte's military back in the Philippines. Um, I don't know what will I become in this country, and I don't know that where I'm coming to a country that is the how do you call that? in English.
Tagalog.
Uh,
Ano ba sa Ilocano? Sa other any language.
so I'm coming into the country who is the promoter of militarism, capitalism, and the pinnacle of all the isms that are endangering human society. Coming from where a third world actually, where I witness how uh, a capitalist company ravage the environment because of profit, how a mountain disappear in a very deep abyss of a hole uh, is created uh, to get the gold, um, and not they don't care what happened to the working class that are living in there before they came. Um, the solidarity of that class actually have made me as who am I now. Unfortunately, um, yeah, this class is also being uh, abused, so that solidarity also that that should actually change the world will not come into being. The solidarity among that class that would actually uh, embolden the change for the better actually is very far from yeah. I don't know if I will ever see uh, a better world. I'm 63 years old now. I don't know if I will live enough to to see a better world. Um, my country is still being ravaged by war. My people are still being uh my people are still killing fellow Filipinos because of wars that they don't actually want. Um, yeah, it's a very hard question that you are asking. Probably I would stop here.
Mm. And thank you for your honesty and for sharing your experience. It's heavy stuff, of course, but I see you as someone who has seen that and continues to show up and organize working people, and I think you should be proud of yourself for that. So. That concludes the end of our planned program. It is 7:47, so I would love to open it up for Q&A from the audience. You can ask questions of me or any or all combination of our panelists. For our in-person folks, you can just raise your hand, and our Zoom folks, they can raise their hand too, right?
Yes.
All right. Anyone have any questions?
What flavor? Okay. Pepperoni or cheese?
Pepperoni. One's good for now.
And the vegetable.
Yeah. I don't want vegetable.
Whatever you got. Any questions from our in-person or Zoom folks? Question.
Yes.
I'll give you a microphone if you could introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Check. Awesome. We get an audience microphone too. Hello, my name is Emmy, pronouns she, her. I'm from here, grew up like Winterside. I kind of the question I wanted to ask specifically to Yoko and Louis, being like members of like large scale like structure-based unions. Like what do you see? And like this is kind of in the context of like Hawaii's unions, while historically have been internationalist, like looking at the ILWU, have kind of fallen into like a little bit protectionism. And I think like there's a lot to be gained from like collaborating internationally. So what do you guys see as your position, like how your union that you're part of interacts with the international community? Or what would you like to see from your union to move in that direction?
You know, what you're asking from me is like it's I cannot really say, but I have my director of our union. If you can answer for us. The vision for our union is like we have so many things that are vision right now, but he can share us what's the best. He would best answer. Thank you, Director Daniel Karen.
Look, I agree that the labor movement in Hawaii and on the mainland needs to do more with the international union community. It's a weak spot. I think I can only speak from the standpoint of Unite Here. I'm not familiar with what every other union is doing. We put a lot of effort into it over the last several years. I can tell you when we did our big Marriott campaign in 2018. Not only did we have multiple cities across America on strike at the same time, coordinating with each other, but we also reached out internationally. We sent a delegation to the UN. We went to Switzerland and had our president there, Gemma Weinstein, talking to a collection of leaders from all over the world. And they actually took action in Switzerland. Some of these unions there did actions against some of the Marriott operated properties in Switzerland while the event was going on. And so we continue to reach out across, international lines to build those alliances. We've hosted labor leaders from the Philippines in our office here locally, and we were blown away by it. Some of what I heard today from both Yoko and I'm sorry, Nelson from the Workers Center. We heard similar stories. One of the things I don't have to worry about being in the labor movement here is getting shot at. Okay, I've never had a bullet fired at me, but some of the stories we heard were just jaw dropping, and I can only imagine having to go through those conditions. Similar stories from Colombia and other countries. When you try to fight against the machine in these countries, you get shot at. And some of our own organizers currently, and we have several Filipino organizers in our local, told stories of what it was like when they were back home. That there was this concerted effort to villainize people who were socialists or communists. Um, yeah, it's very different than what we've endured here. But yeah, I think it's a weak spot for the labor movement as far as the coordination and work with other unions across the world. We have to go there. Like the industries that we work in are increasingly becoming global. Marriott has now as many hotels in China as they have in America. Okay, and so it's just growing and growing and growing. So our ability, even through the strike weapon, is getting undermined by the massive growth of these industries. And so if we don't work with unions in those other countries, it's at our own peril. And so I'm glad that our union is doing that work. I don't think it is where it needs to be. I think we need to increase it tenfold. But we do have a few individuals in our international office that's all they do is travel the world and talk to labor leaders. And Philippines is one of the countries we visit a lot.
Any other questions? We got anyone online or? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yoko, I'm so sorry.
Hi.
Don't be hiding.
Yeah.
Teacher, we have homework. I
am a
kidding,
teacher.
kidding. Okay, no, I was thinking about it already. We've also hosted KMU labor leader at our H&A office as well. But my dream is that exactly as you said. But there's actually one like really concrete thing that can happen pretty easily is there's something called the International Solidarity Affair that happens annually in the Philippines. It's actually where I met labor leaders from Aotearoa, Australia, Hong Kong, uh, Indonesia, lots of other places. Um, the Dutch are from
The Netherlands?
the Netherlands. Thank you. Um, many different union and labor leaders at that International Solidarity Affair, which is actually currently happening right now. And the Worker Center did send a delegate, but for safety, we're not going to say who and where. But and that also helps in the Philippines too, because when you have international attention, it's less likely that you will your like activity will be shot at. Um not 100%, but less likely. Um yeah, and it's super helpful. Like when I went on ISA in 2018, yes, 2018, the Coca-Cola factory in Laguna was on strike. And because we had an international delegation there of labor leaders from all over the world, it brought all this attention. And Coca-Cola was like, okay, fine, we'll give the workers back to their work. Yeah. So it's super helpful. But also sharing, right? Like what they're doing in each country and the different tactics and strategies was also helpful for to bring back in different areas. But yeah, the dream is like everyone, all the unions in Hawaii to participate, especially but also like how do we participate locally, like with like our Kanaka Maoli struggles, right? Like how do we how do we do that? Like are our unions really working together here rather than just, having an annual picnic? I didn't no shade at all. But like are we really like putting the pressure to the bosses collectively here? Silently walks away.
I mean, personally, I'd say no, but we'll leave it up to
Answer your question.
as a member of the HSTA, I would say room for improvement.
I mean, I think it's also like business unionism. Yeah, like that is a very, for a lot of the big unions here in Hawaii, it has become the member dues are business, right? Profit for them to keep their businesses, pay all their staff, right? You guys know this year is a part of unions. And then, but then also like I have experience in a union and I didn't learn anything. I was just sort of like told stuff via email, but then I'm not engaged in terms of how do you organize or how do you engage your coworkers. I would have like online Zoom meetings about our contract, but I have no idea like what empowered working persons are, and there eventually I found out that there was a steward's training, but I ended up shifting jobs after. But it was just so I was disappointed. Like, I knew I read books about our labor history and we're so powerful. And I'm like, how come I'm in a union? I don't feel empowered. But I think the issue of business unionism, I think I mean, so there's many different reasons for that too, because under American law, right now we're U.S. National Labor Relations Act and all of that, and how our organizing has shifted from grassroots, militant, rank and file led to grievances that are told to the arbitrator, and that's a whole different avenue now,
Tell it.
right? You guys know you do this work daily.
Boo.
So, I mean, but at the same time, it's like, do you want to throw that away though?
No, well, no,
Not really, right? So it's like this other avenue that has evolved in the labor movement that we should it's a new condition, right? It's a new avenue. And I think there's so much energy and effort that goes through that kind of channel now with the legal way and the arbitration way. But I think we even have conversations and clear about like how do we make sure that these other methods of the street protests, all of this kind of worker to worker organizing, we try to kind of make sure that stuff is still circulating in our consciousness as tools. We just have a lot of tools now. So, but I also think we do definitely need to talk as different unions, and we need to have a container, like a good committee to call all the unions we have to sit together and what is our political economy? Like first, like right now with this information stuff that we're facing and all of these cutbacks on civil rights and political environmental rights, all these kind of things that we've cherished, we kind of were privileged in a bit to have. And then the kind of shifts in our industry, we need to have a conversation about that. And then also, where are our unions positioned in those industries, and how can we leverage, our power in those contexts? I think the strategy needs to come out. And if we're not talking, it's hard to figure out what that would be. So I think I would like to have that like collective conversation, and we should hold that make a space for that.
Am I allowed to ask a question of the librarian?
Sure.
Knowing world history, US history, and Hawaii history, labor organizing, and how, like communist socialist roots, and then, the Red Scare, and, like counterintelligence and FBI and all the things. Do you think there, as we air this on the internet, yeah. Mr. FBI agent, what do you think is the reality of like how much suppression in labor organizing or even labor affiliate like groupings and whatnot, without naming names, like are influenced? What do you think is could be the level of influence, and could that be one of the reasons why it's so hard, or am I just trying to find an excuse?
You mean the influence of like being complacent and not really pushing the agenda kind of thing?
Yeah, like that counter, that essentially like what they did to labor movements before, right? They would infiltrate, they would cause, sow intrigue, they would, the whatever, do bad things in order to like divide people and kind of crush organizing and things like that, right? Like do you think there's a level, like what is the role of surveillance in this current
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely possible. I mean, that's the spies, you mean, and the kind of sabotage. I mean, I think definitely, I mean, I haven't heard examples of yet, but I do feel that we could be being surveilled. I mean, I think given the politics of today and the climate that we're in, I think the level of intensity of our organizing will probably call more scary stuff towards us. And so I don't think we're there yet, though. I think we're still like siloed and we're not really building to be that powerful that threatens. I don't think we're there. So I don't think
But we used to be.
We used to be.
Not we, but you know,
The
they.
history of our of Hawaii labor was very powerful. But again, like I said, we got our base shuffled with the shifts in the economy and Cold War and all that. But we want to build up to something powerful again. And I think we should be conscious that there can be attraction of surveillance and sabotage. And, you know, I think we should all figure out like what are the signs of that so we can be aware if it happens, if it comes to that. I'm sorry to be dark, but I mean, you know,
You're right.
yeah.
Like it's important to be prepared. All right, it is past time. It's 8:04. So let's wrap it up. Let's please give a big round of applause to all of our presenters.
Leon raised her hand.
Huh?
Somebody,
Someone else question?
yeah.
Oh no.
Is it too late?
You can cut
make
me
it
off.
quick.
That's fine.
Go ahead, Dion.
I just actually wanted to comment because this is actually something in the classes that I've been teaching in terms of, you know, the question coming up. And when you think about unions, right, you have servicing model, which is kind of what you guys were talking about. And then you have organizing models in terms of they never stopped, right? And so organizing really came, of course, before the law said that we could, you know, organize. But I think that I remind people in the classes that I teach that, you know, the union is only as strong as the members. And so when we put it on the unions, we're actually trying to preserve the construct that the union is, you know, like some other entity besides the members. And so while it might show up that way today in terms of how you said, you know, union is like business and all of that, that's right. Money doesn't come in. We cannot do the work that we do. But I think it's important for us individually and collectively to take back the individual power because the member makes the union, you know, and not the
Yes.
other way around.
Yes.
So that's all. Thank you for allowing that.
And then Osman was also raising his hand.
That's right. I wanted to address the surveillance question. I don't want to take up the time, but I think we should even with the sort of the de-radicalization of the sorry. By the way, I'm Professor Keshwars. I'm the economist at Clear. Thanks for this is a great panel. But so as a question to sort of surveillance, I think you know all of our organizations that we consider to be on the left, especially the labor movement, we should always assume that the movement has been thoroughly infiltrated. You should go through every activity with the possibility that there are cops, there are people being surveilled, and just go with that assumption because as soon as it gains any power, as soon as it gains threatening power, it will for sure be surveilled, especially in the age of AI. I mean, and there's a famous story about Lenin, right, where there was a one of the hardest core Bolsheviks before the revolution turned out to be a cop, and they did such good organizing that he became an actual Bolshevik after the Russian Revolution. So, you know, be good organizers, be good political movers, but always assume that you are being surveilled. So that's I don't want to push this meeting longer than it is. So thank you all.
Any last quick comments before we wrap it up for real?
Or make jobs union.
This is what they call wait time if you're a teacher. All right, let's give a big round of applause to all of our amazing panelists. Thank you for sharing about your work.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Even if you're on
Thank you,
YouTube.
everyone.
We'll see this on YouTube. Yeah.
Thank you, online folks. Thank you, in person folks.